Okay, so I welcome you to this class, which is called What is Love Made of? And what we're going to discuss today and the following 2 weeks during our 3 meetings is the concept of love, um, Freudian concept of love, because our today's understanding, the common understanding what love is largely defined by Freudian perspective. So when we talk about love today in our everyday language, everyday life, what we see as love, as the essence of love, it's still this Freudian perspective that implies that at the basis of all the human proximity, especially feeling of love and the whole culture, is sexual drive, understood in a really basic way. And my idea here and what I want to do, what I try to do, the kind of experiment I want to accomplish is to see love not as based on a sexual instinct, but on something else. And the other thing is that there are our choices are in everyday life is that we perceive love as biological, on a biological ground, and we see a sexual instinct as the basis of it. In this case, either we try to perceive it as something spiritual, something that has nothing to do with biology. So there's two choices, and what I want to do is I want to develop the other perspective on love, which is not going to be that spiritual and something deprived of biology totally, but it's based on biology, but not on in this way like Freud did, because Freud wanted to be scientific in this sense, and he developed his understanding of love as trying to be scientist, and what he and his ideas, his developments, it implies that love is something based on sexual instinct. But in biology, there is possible to without going anywhere beyond biology, just interpretation of modern contemporary scientific findings, to build other philosophical view on love that is not going to be based on a sexual instinct or based on what we call what we define as sexual instinct. So, and this is kind of experiment, it's just a philosophical experiment, and throughout this course we're supposed to learn to switch our own everyday perspective on love, because it's largely Freudian, and try to see it from the other point of view. So this is a philosophical exercise, to change our understanding, to switch this perspective. Just try to do it. So today we will start with Plato's understanding of love. This is because Freud believed that he did nothing significantly different from Freud in his development of his idea of love. So Freud saw that he follows Plato ideas, and that Plato was pansexualistic as that Plato's view was as pansexualistic as Freudian, and so he perceived Freud perceived Plato as someone, as his forerunner. But so for us today, the task is to see Plato in a different way, not in Freudian way. And the problem is that Plato is defined today through the lens of Freudian understanding of culture and Freudian understanding of what is love. And we'll try to change it today, to switch this perspective. And on the following meeting, we'll talk about Freud, and we'll try to find the roots of why Freud thought that there is a sexual instinct is the basis for a feeling of love, a feeling of attachment. We'll also try to find in Freud's theory the basics, the ground for shifting his own perspective. It's possible within Freudian pansexualistic theory to find the other theory which actually contradicts his main idea. And also we'll see further development of psychoanalytic theory that actually that show that Freud was wrong. And on the last meeting, we'll go deeper into biology and socio-cognitive neuroscience to show that within the biological perspective, within the very biology and materiality of our existence, we can find the basis for shifting this initial Freudian perspective. So it's supposed to be interesting because in the end, we should like what we think today, what love is, like what comes as a conventional idea, it comes without saying for us. We're supposed to switch it and like become totally different human beings because love is love, and what we think sex is, it's quite important for our everyday life and of our thinking and perception of other people, of our relationship. And try to change by trying to change this, the basic of this, we become different people. So it's interesting what will happen at the end. So today is Plato, and Plato theory of love, of course, seems to feel good enough in our common understanding today, common understanding of love. But this is because this common understanding of love is largely formed by Freud, by Freudian discourse. And love in Plato seemed to be an elevation. If we perceive it within our everyday thinking, our understanding of love, it seems to be elevation of sexual instinct into more sublime kinds of attraction. And I will try to demonstrate that although it is possible, like Freud did, to see this kind of elevation of sexual instinct into something more sublime, it is possible to see this in Plato. But if we see only this, it drastically simplifies Plato theory. And the main thing here is also that it doesn't allow us to see the general atmosphere of Plato's love. And if considered from a bit different point of view, Plato's understanding of love actually has the power to deconstruct Freudian understanding, conception of love, and that is our today's intuitive understanding of what love is. So first of all, we'll take a look at Plato's Symposium. It's his key dialogue that expresses his theory of love. And in Symposium, Socrates recounts his dialogue with Diotima and presents what is called ladder of love. Ladder of love, its conventional name. It presents kind of continuum of eroticism, the process of unfolding, of how love and eroticism unfolds. And on the face of it, it really starts with a carnal, erotic, that we call sexual desire, and then it elevates into more refined level. So this continuum is Diotima's ladder of love. And Diotima, this ladder of love is usually grasped as a way of transforming the basic erotic desire, or what we call today sexual desire, into the love of wisdom. That is, wisdom is love of philosophy. That is wisdom, Sophia, and love. So in Diotima's words, it's a long one. Yeah, you can see it. This is how she describes it, what the unfolding of love is. I will read the whole thing. And first of all, he, the lover, must love one body and there generate beautiful species. Then he must realize that the body that is in, that the beauty that is in everybody whatsoever is related to that in another body. And with this realization, he must be the lover of all beautiful bodies, and in context lacking this erotic intensity for the only one body in the belief that it is pretty. After this, he must believe that the beauty in soul is more honorable than that in the body, so that even if someone who is distant in his soul has only a slight youthful charm, the lover must be content with it and love and cherish him and engender and seek such speeches as will make the young better. And after this proceed, he must lead the beloved on the sciences, that he himself, the lover, may see the beauty of sciences, and in looking at the beautiful, which is now so past, no longer be content with a lackey, like a lackey with the beauty in one of a boy, of some human being, of some practice, not to be a sorry sort of slave and petty calculator, but with a permanent turn to the vast open sea of the beautiful, behold it and give birth to ungrudging philosophy, in ungrudging philosophy to many beautiful and magnificent speeches and thoughts. So this is ladder of love, the way Diotima presents it. This is how continuum of law is supposed to unfold there. And it is quite common to summarize Diotima's ladder of love like in the following way, that it is on an initial stage of this ladder that there is sexual desire is present for the beautiful body, one body, and then it has to be transformed into the love of all beautiful bodies, and then into the love of beauty of souls, and the last stage is love of wisdom. So it's possible to see here this Freudian perspective, that it's first it's sexual desire, and then it's sublimated into the higher kinds of attraction. But this summary might seem perfectly logical to us, but it leaves a substantial space for reconsideration. And understood in such way, Plato's account of love, of course, is logically interpreted as something Freudian, some kind of Freudian way of sublimation, understanding of love as sublimation of sexual instinct. And in the words of Stella Sanford, she's eminent Platonic scholar, she claims that the account of Eros in Socrates' speech could thus very easily be read mutatis mutandis as, if not itself a theory of sublimation, then an exceptionally good example of the process. So it can be seen like this, but according to this view, Plato, anticipating Freud, already theorized not only human love, but also the whole socio-cultural activity as the elevation of sexual desire. And in a popular version of Plato and Freud, for both, the human story, the human civilization starts with the transformation of sexual attraction into higher and finer activities. For example, love. And in accordance with this assumption, talking about sublimation, Freud actually didn't invent anything new, but just inherited or reinterpreted Plato's understanding of love. But a more relevant conclusion from this statement, that there is a similarity between Plato and Freud, it is more relevant to claim that what happened in our civilization, in today's world, what is happening is that the problem with those who try to interpret Plato, who try to understand what Plato was talking about, and the minds of those people and our minds are constructed in a Freudian way. So it's just Freudian perspective that exists in our minds, and through this lens, through this Freudian perspective, we perceive Plato, and this is why we see this Freudian understanding of Plato within the Plato. But if we switch this perspective, if we switch this Freudian perspective, we might be able to see something else in Plato, not the Freudian way of thinking about love. And so this is why, Stella Sanford claims that the account of Eros in Socrates' speech could thus very easily be, I did it, the other one. So it was not Plato who anticipated Freud, but one aspect of Freud's theory of sexuality, the sublimation of sexual drive, has been a major theme in the 20th century interpretation of Plato's concept of eros. So it's not the problem of Plato that Freudian idea exists within his theory. It's just a problem of those of our interpretation of Freud. That what we see in Freud is basically what we see in Plato is basically Freud. So it's our problem, not Plato's problem. And to fix it, to solve this problem, we might try to switch the perspective from pansexualistic Freudian perspective to other perspective and try to see Plato from the updated point of view. So it was not Plato who anticipated Freud, just the problem with interpretation of Plato that we see Freud. And there's also other researcher who claims that we're not supposed to see this pansexualism in interpretation of ancient Greece, because it's just our perspective. He claims, to be precise, yes, just because modern bourgeois Westerns are so obsessed with sexuality, so convinced that it holds the key to the hermeneutics of the self, and hence to social psychology as an object of historical study, we ought not therefore to conclude that everyone has always considered sexuality as a basic and irreducible element in or a central feature of human life. So here we also see that this might be our problem, not the problem of Plato. It's our problem of Freudian way of interpretation. And with more detailed examination, supplemented by effort of consciousness by trying to remove from this Freudian pansexualistic perspective, it starts to be more clear that it is more relevant to see Diotima understanding of love not as a process of sublimation of sexual desire, but as a projection of a scope of the whole reproductive complex at the cultural and metaphysical level. So it's not only about sexual attraction, but about the whole reproductive complex. That something that Diotima projects into the human law, into the metaphysical and cultural level is not sexual desire, not sublimated sexual desire, but rather the whole complex of reproduction. And in this complex, the prototype of what we today distinguish as sexual desire didn't actually, in this complex that she projects, the whole complex of reproduction, the key feature is not the sexual desire. Didn't play its central role, but it can be claimed that a longing for the body of the beloved, which we now, the problem with us is that we now just reduced to sexual desire. This longing for the body of others really played an important role in Diotima's speech, and at the same time, it's closely interwoven with and inseparable from other aspects of this extended reproductive complex. So it's not only about sexual desire, but it's about the whole reproductive longing, the whole reproductive complex. And so it doesn't function in Diotima's speech as a separate, the sexual desire doesn't function in her speech as a separate self-sufficient desire of sexual intercourse, but rather as a manifestation of something reproductive itself. And so in other words, since Plato's account of eroticism is reproductive, not pansexualistic, and it's reproductive in the widest sense possible, when he projects, or Diotima projects the physical dimension of eroticism into the higher cultural and metaphysical levels, they project the whole interwoven complex of reproduction, including its elements we are now conventionally distinguished as sexual attraction, but also pregnancy, we'll see about this, and giving birth, nourishment, and care. So all those aspects of reproductive complex, not only not only sexual desire, but all the whole biological complex is in the diatymal ladder of love, in Plato's concept of love, is projected into the cultural level. So it's not a sublimation of sexual instinct. It's a projection of the whole reproductive complex, including pregnancy, nourishment, giving birth, and what is important, taking care. If we attribute the central role of diatyma's account of love, it shouldn't be a sexual desire. So if you want to see some key element within this reproductive complex, it won't be sexual desire, but rather I would claim it might be something like pregnancy, birth, care, and nourishment. This assemblage, it's much more important to comprehend this element is more important in comprehending Plato's theory than sexual desire. And the curious thing is that this revolutionary switch of perspective in understanding Plato theory of love, can be accomplished without even referring to nothing else, except that we quoted already passage from Diotima, the one that first seemed for us perfectly logical to see Plato as in a Freudian way. So first we took a look on a Diotima's ladder of love, and what we saw there is that it is Freudian, that it really had this element of sublimation of sexual desire. But now if we'll shift the perspective and we'll try to see it from the point of view that key elements are not sexual drive, but rather some kind of generation and giving birth, pregnancy, that is generative processes, and also taking care, we'll see it in a totally different way. So let's try again. The diatymal ladder of love works like these illusions, where you can see two alternative meanings at the same time. And as a result of, if you just do this perspectual shift in your brain, in your mind, you'll reveal something else. It's something that you already saw, this passage, but if you shift the perspective, you'll be able to reveal in this very passage a totally different perspective. So let's try again. If we consider her ladder of love under a shifted perspective, we'll be like able to recognize that in each of the stages Diotima presents, love is defined as through not only the specific object of desire, like those beauty of body, or the last stage is wisdom, those are object of desire, but also it's woven, these processes are woven into the unfolding process of generative reproduction. So there is generation, not only desire towards some specific object. And for example, here we can see that the love for single body is presented in a general context of procreating of beautiful species. This is the result of longing for a beautiful body. He must love the body and they generate beautiful species. And the next stage of ladder of love results in giving birth to of such species as will make the young better. And the next stage is the great sea of beauty that enables lovers to bring to birth many beautiful, even magnificent words and thoughts in the love of wisdom. So here, in every stage, we can see that the result of it is generation. It's not only some urge towards the object, but it's always within the general context of generation, giving birth. And Diotima herself correcting Socrates, who guessed that the purpose of erotic desire is possession. She corrects him and claims that the purpose of desire is giving birth in a beautiful in relation to both body and soul. So the idea, the main thing here is the key element is giving birth within the Plato understanding of love. And we see the Diotima is woman, and the woman who teaches Socrates the art of love. So probably what she presents has to do something more with woman, specifically feminine reproductive abilities. And referring to this part of speech, Sanford concludes that Diotima's view on love is notable, especially for the centrality of extended metaphors of pregnancy and birth in her account of Eros. So key elements, according to Sanford, is pregnancy and birth. And same with Halperin, he claims that in Platonic view, Eros aims at procreation, not as in possession. And its goal, it's never fulfilled. It can't be fulfilled on a stage, what we now call sexual intercourse. So the sexual intercourse, it's not the final stage where the goal of love desire ends, and it's not even a sublimation of this desire. And the climax of love relationship in Plato is not the sexual kind, but is procreative, because well, later it's weird, but intercourse culminates not in orgasm but in giving birth. This is the result of it, and the general context. So he also points out that in Plato, pregnancy is the cause, not the consequence of love. We remember that Plato's philosophers are already pregnant with wisdom, and by having conversation with those, by falling in love with their lovers, they conceive after they are pregnant and they give birth to wisdom. And according to Diotima, man cherishes those beautiful bodies rather than ugly ones because he is already pregnant. So before all the ladder of love starts, they are pregnant already. So in Halperin's interpretation, Diotima speaks of erotic desire consisted in an excitation brought by pregnancy, and it results in the ejaculation of a baby. So moreover, according to Diotima, the conjunction of man and woman is already a begetting. So somehow it is given birth that comes first, and before even longing for a conjunction of body that we call sexual intercourse. And this, at the same time, this conjunction is not something that results in giving birth, but precedes giving birth. So in this view, both Halperin and Sanford, they capture the essence of Diotima account of love, but I would insist here that not only what they claim, not only those elements that they claim to be key, the most important here, the central here, pregnancy and giving birth, but also they are inseparable from other elements, that is from care and nourishment. Those are other important and central for Plato's understanding of love, not only giving birth and pregnancy, but also taking care and nourishment. And what is more, care and nourishment, it's not only key stages in the unfolding of love, but it can be claimed that the very atmosphere of Plato that permits basically all of the aspects, all of the stages. And before introducing the ladder of love, Diotima discusses the desire of procreation in an animalistic kingdom, in order then to project this animalistic desire into the sphere of human love. So while she talked about animalistic kingdom, Diotima reconstructs the interwoven manifestation of desire of procreation, that is, desire of union and desire to nourish the offspring. And she claims that Diotima claims that yeah, the lovers. Yeah, first she claims that when animals desire to reproduce, they are in agony. Um, when they take the infection of love, and which begins with the desire of union. In the case of animals, it begins with desire of union, but later to this is added the desire to nourish their offspring, and they even are ready to battle. Even the weaker animal are ready to battle with stronger animal, just to protect and to die, to protect their offspring, and even they're ready to die for them, and to um, so they need to nourish them and to take care to maintain their offspring. And in the same way, human, whenever they're in a certain age, so first he described the animalistic kingdom and showed that there is this instinct urge to reproduce and to take care of the offspring, which is same in also basic desire. And then she what she does is she projects this animalistic perspective into the human love, claiming that when humans are in a certain age, their nature desires to give birth. So what our nature desires is to give birth, not the sexual. We don't have the sexual instinct. So the only difference that one reveals in Plato or Diotimus presenting animal and human realms is that in case of human, the desire of union and nurturing behavior are undividedly uh, intervened in their, and basically they permeate all the stages of the entire reproductive complex. It defines the entire reproductive complex. And Diotima distinguishes two human ways to satisfy the erotic desire. She claimed that those who are pregnant in first there are those who are pregnant in terms of a body, and they are restoring to animalistic eros, which involves generation and care of mortal offspring. And there are those who are pregnant in terms of soul and then satisfy their erotic desire by restoring to elevated eros and they do it through advancing the ladder of love, and which also involves the generation and taking care of offspring, but of a different kind. So for Diotima, there are two ways to implement, to satisfy, two ways of satisfaction of erotic desire. Those who are philosophers, those who are advancing the ladder of love, they satisfy these desires through generating offspring which are of elevated kind. Those offspring are ideas and they take care of ideas, while the other type of satisfaction of erotic desire is generation and taking care of just normal human offspring. And the offspring of those of philosophers are ideas. The result of love are ideas, and they belong to divine world. And according to Plato, everyone would choose for themselves those kind of children rather than humankind. And intellectual activity, which is supposed to be a result of ladder of love, is presented of Plato in the scope of reproductive care and nourishment. Just instead of newborn infants who we want to take care of, the erotic activity of those advancing the ladder of love involves the generation and taking care of ideas. So still we can see here in both cases, we can see the caring behavior as a key feature. So Plato not only talks about the lover's care of offspring, but also about the care of a lover for his beloved. So the one who loves takes care of a beloved one, and the lover cares about his beloved as he is his own child. He cares about his education. He educates him and he nourishes him, but in an intellectual sense. So here we can see that taking care of a beloved one and of the offspring, which are ideas, as the key feature of this diatymus ladder of love, Plato understanding of love. And what is important, Plato does not imply that um, when he talks about lovers taking care of their offspring, mm, he does not imply that after the conception and giving birth to new ideas, so when the new ideas are generated as a result of this elevated kind of love, um, when ideas are generated, when this process of generation of ideas is accomplished, and so the one who is philosopher, who is involved in this philosophical dialogue, he will not isolate himself from the others and devote himself entirely to the world of ideas, that is, to philosophy. So, but in Plato's account, philosophy doesn't imply this self-isolation. On the contrary, through all the stages of ladder of love, including the last stage where when philosophical ideas are generated, on all of these stages, there remain a space of interpersonal intimacy, because after this stage is accomplished, the lovers take care, both of them mutually take care of the ideas. That is, they have this dialogue, mm, and they cherish uh, what they gave birth to. So philosophical activity implies that lovers, uh, both of them take care of the offspring, and also they have this caring friendship between them throughout, uh, on all of the stages. And according to Plato, philosophical lovers, here is the quote, philosophical lovers share the nurturing of what is begotten, so that men in this condition enjoy a far fuller community with each other, and which comes with and with, with each other than with which comes with children, and a far surer friendship, since the children of their union are fairer and more deathless. So here we can see that in both cases, in the case of realization of this basic type of not elevated type of erotic activity, there is a caring behavior toward each other and the taking care of offspring. And in case of a philosophical kind of love, those who advance the ladder of love, they also have this, they take care of each other, and they take care of what they give birth to. So considered from this updated point of view, the whole ladder of love and the very phenomena of Plato's love and what is represented is an act of caring. And care and nurturing behavior are far from being just the element of reproductive complex, just something that we usually think that comes after the desire of a body, when this basic satisfaction is accomplished and through the sexual intercourse, and then it follows by giving birth to offspring. But instead, so we usually define this reproductive, we got used to define the reproductive complex on these stages, that first it's desire to reproduce for sexual intercourse, then sexual intercourse, then uh, giving birth to children, then taking care, even sometimes taking care and nourishment. We exclude from reproductive complex, although it is important part, because human children will not survive if they are not taken care of. So this is substantial part of reproductive complex. And for Freud, within this biological perspective of human reproduction, the key feature that defines it is sexual uh, sexual desire, and this is the lens through which we perceive Plato. But if we shift this perspective and see all the other elements of reproductive complex as a key in Plato, will comprehend Plato much better. And it's possible to see the caring behavior not only towards the child but towards the lovers on a biological level, because this is what we do. We cherish, we take care, biologically, physically. It's not something spiritual. And we give birth to children, we take care of them, and we yeah, all of those stages, they are not less important or even more important. But there's something that we separate from this reproductive complex as a sexual desire. And the other, yeah, so care and nurturing behavior are not just the element in reproductive complex that comes after the desire of body and reproduction and giving birth to children, but it's something that is spread and penetrated throughout the whole reproductive complex, and something that, though, for this reason, defines the reproductive complex that Plato projects on a metaphysical and cultural level. So taking care can be seen as the most appropriate concept to capture the general atmosphere of Plato's account of love. And the other thing that I want us to take a look at is pederasty. And this is a really difficult ideas I'll try to develop here, because usually the way we perceive pederasty, we reveal so this basic Athenian, ancient Greek type of love. Usually, what we see here, following our post-Freudian pansexualistic worldview, what we see here is something that is based on the sexual intercourse between man and younger boy, but if you try to accomplish this switch of perspective and see within the very body of pederasty something else, this would probably will help us to shift the perspective, our everyday perspective on love. Because if we try to, only when we do this, and this is really really hard to do. So let's see. Basically, what Diotima teaches in her speech, and what Socrates or Plato taught in the symposium, is the art of pederasty, because pederasty signifies a typical Athenian ancient relationship between adult male lover and younger male. So, and pederasty is a combination of two words, that is child and lover. Pederastic love relationship were basically regarded by Athenian society as the most honorable and even the principal cultural model for free relationship between citizens. So this was the ideal of love between an older male and younger male. And from a modern pansexualistic perspective, pederasty is primarily understood as a certain type of sexual relationship. And the commonly accepted definition of pederasty refers to a sexual relationship between an older and a younger male. And this is what Oxford Dictionary presents. It defines it as a homosexual relationship between a man and a boy, a homosexual anal intercourse. So this is the contemporary definition of what pederasty is. And here we can see that it's, of course, Freudian one, because we tend to see, if it's we tend to see within a cultural model of love, of ancient love, and reduce it to a sexual intercourse and see it as a basic reality of this phenomenon. We clearly see that our minds are post-Freudian, defined by Freud. And just to shift this perspective, such consideration, and at least to see that it's not far from a full one, from exhaustive one, might be able to shift our everyday perspective. So it's not enough to discuss, it's far from enough to discuss a pederasty as a specific sexual relationship, because within such perspective, when we see it as a sexual relationship, a really crucial dimension of this phenomena pederasty is overlooked. And precisely, I claim that this is phenomena of care. Yeah, we don't see in this definition, there is no space for the care. We reduce the reality of human intimacy. We see this definition that the reality of human intimacy, human love is reduced to sexual aspect. And it's not enough. It's far from enough. And it's really, we can ask why we do that. Because taking care is not less substantial. It's not less, it's fit much better to define on the biological level what love is. And, the reality and the materiality of love. So if you shift from the pansexualistic point of consideration, and we'll basically get a really different perspective on pederasty. And in its first place, it should be taken into account that pederasty presupposes genuine emotional attachment of man and a boy. So it's not about sex. It's first of all about genuine emotional attachment. This is what defines it. If it's just sex between man and a boy, it's not pederasty. It's not. This is not it. It's not an ideal of Athenian law. Pederastic couples were also said to be so strong that they were feared by tyrants, and because the bond between the lovers was stronger than the obedience to a tyrannic ruler. So this was really strong emotional attachment, first of all. And pederastic relationship was represented in art and generally in Athenian culture as first educative, primary educative, not sexual. So the function of the pederastic relationship is educational. So the older lover has to educate, protect, love, and provide a role model for the younger one. And by spending time with the older male, the young male is supposed to learn how to be a man himself. But nevertheless, even considering the fact that in ancient Athens, pederasty was represented as pursuing this educational function, our mind is pansexualistic, and we are still predisposed to see a true meaning, a real meaning in the interpretation of this phenomena in sexuality. We still tend to think that to read this representation of pederasty as educational phenomena, we still tend to see it as just a cover for a true purpose, which is sexual. Because for us, the sexual reality is the ultimate reality. So all the other representation, the educational representation and ideas that they're supposed to be genuine attachment, we tend to see as a cover for the satisfaction of erotic desire. And I know that, and this is what we're trying to change here. And this happens because we are accustomed to think as sexual instinct as primal, as something that defines not only human relationship, but the human being itself. So, and at the same time, the relationship of care, even if it's not less material, it presupposes nourishment, especially. It presupposes connection of body and physical intimacy. Still, we consider it as something secondary, as something, following Freud, as something that derived from this basic urge of sexual instinct, or something that is optionally added, that it's not necessary, must be there. So something secondary. And that is what I'm trying to change. And the other kind of comprehension of Greek pederasty requires, of course, the shift of this pansexualistic perspective. And to accomplish this, the Harper Lee's discussion of what pederasty is might be useful here. Harper Lee represents pederasty as a deployment of male procreative imaginary, and reveals the origin of pederasty in a more archaic, secret male initiation rituals that also presuppose physical contact between men and boys. And the explicit ideological basis for those archaic rituals are notion that men are not born but made. So what was those archaic rituals about is to create a man, because men is something that is someone who is not born but supposed to be made. And this implies that boys will not become men through can only become men if they go through this process of initiation. And it's not just enough for them to be born from a woman. They're supposed to go through the process of initiation, this process of rituals. And those rituals, they have to do something with the transfer skills, knowledge, and social identity from one generation of males to next one. And Harpelin believes that, observes actually, that ritual pederasty represents the procreation of males by males. So what he claims is, after boys have been born physically and reared by women, they must be born a second time culturally. So those are the tasks that those rituals accomplish. They create men, give birth to men. And Harpelin points out that the process by which one generation of males give birth to a succeeding to other generation of males is explicitly thematized as analogy of female reproductive functions. For example, a ritual nose bleeding or penile inclusion that might signify male menstruation, but Harpelins overlook here that this can also be read as postpartum bleeding after giving birth, and also oral insemination of yas by older male is represented as breastfeeding. So, and similarly, the other sociologist, Barry Adams, considers that Greek pederasty is this, let's see, is the second stage of parenting that succeeds the mother-child relationship. And in corresponding manner, also Hobbes discusses the ideal of pederastic love presented by Diotima as projection of parental complex into the cultural dimensional complex. And she claimed that Diotima is certainly inviting us to see the older male Erastes as pregnant. And the impact of the pregnancy image is heightened still further if, in addition to law, we consider the educative element central to male pederasty. And furthermore, in this context, Hobbes also reminds us that we also have Socrates' allusion of the notion of education as a pouring of liquid from a fuller to emptier. And considering this Harpelin's and Adams and Hobbes discussion, it is really reasonable to claim that pederasty is not that much of deviated version of heterosexual sexual relationship, which is within our pansexualistic view, we see it as a central, the desire of a man towards a woman. We see it as a basic desire of human being, and this is what our materiality of love is based on, the sublimation of this basic desire. And of course, this way of the pederastic Greek kind of love is we tend to see within this perspective as a deviation from this, from the desire of man, sexual desire towards a woman. And this is kind of within this perspective, pederasty is the deviated kind of this basic essence of human love. But if we shift this perspective, we see that it's rather extended version of parenthood, not a deviated version of heterosexual sexual desire, but extended version of parenthood. And pederasty is a phenomenon that extends the reproductive complex, the whole reproductive complex, not just deviates the sexual desire, but extends the whole reproductive complex and complemented with a symbolic dimension. That is the acquisition of identity of adult male. So not only women give birth to a man, but only this reproductive complex and takes care of a boy, but also to this reproductive complex is added a cultural symbolic dimension. So they have to undergo, boys have to undergo the process of, the man has to give birth to them on the second stage. And so the physical birth from the woman is complemented by the second symbolical birth. And in support of the statement that it's not a deviated heterosexual desire, but extended uh, type of extended version of parenthood, it should be noted that Athenian apparatus of pederasty was not in contradiction with apparatus of parenthood. And according to ancient sources, Athenian fathers would pray for their child, for their sons, that they would attract attention of men. So it was something that fathers wanted their children, their sons, to this kind of relationship to be in. So the next stage of parenthood, which is really weird for us today, probably. And today, intuitive tendency to believe that this oral insemination represents was presented as a breastfeeding. We tend to think, me too, but I'm trying to overcome it. That the way it's presented, the fact that it was presented as a breastfeeding and symbolized as a breastfeeding, it's just something that, some way to cover that for real, the reality of this phenomena, because we see the reality that it's a sexual urge that was satisfied through this process, and the type of to cover it, to explain it, it just was presented as a breastfeeding. But what is, and that the one who did this, what was led by the desire to satisfy his sexual instinct. But what if we assume, and this is hard, but still, what if we assume that the reason for the formation of close human relationship is not a sexual instinct, if we presuppose that it's not sexual instinct, but at least not to that extent basic need to participate in caring relationship, and which we don't comprehend as a sublimation of sexual desire, but as a self-sufficient need, it would turn out that this oral insemination that was presented as breastfeeding, in fact, was a projection of a breastfeeding for real, not as a cover, and not as a deviated type of satisfying the sexual instinct, but it really was a type of breastfeeding, a male breastfeeding. So it's hard to accomplish, of course, but just if we try to think of it in this way, or it's what not a lie that covers some animalistic sexual desire, but it was really true that it was sort of, and for real, was a type of a breastfeeding, extended version of a breastfeeding. And to put it differently, although pederastic love affairs involved carnal dimension, the carnal contact between what we now perceive as exclusively in sexual terms, this carnal contact between Orestes, the older male, and the younger boy, which is traditionally perceived as sexual, can also reasonably be presented as modified version of a physical contact of a mother and a child during breastfeeding, because during breastfeeding there's same physical proximity and penetrating the body of the other. So this was the extended version. What if it's really the extended version of this physical contact, and not a deviated version, as Freud presupposed, of sexual intercourse? And additionally, in light of this thought, we might also rethink the current approach to the issue of child sexual abuse, because it could be probably assumed that the boundary between acceptable and unacceptable with regard to a physical contact of a child should be drawn not on the ground whether this context embodies a sexual context or not, but whether it's performed in a general context of care with or in the context of satisfaction of egoistic satisfaction of some personal needs, and it doesn't matter if it's and at the same time sacrifice of a child's own need to be taken care of. So yeah, there's lots of thinking can be done here, and for our pansexualistic mind, it's truly a challenge here to comprehend pederastic physical contact as not implying the child abuse, and our inability to comprehend it, but the pederasty as not implying abuse is, um, of course, conditioned by this intuition to reduce the essence of human being to sexuality and satisfaction of egoistic needs, the central of which is sexual desire, and why, and at the same time we perceive taking care as desirable but not constituting a human nature, as something added, something that's artificial, and something that's not crucial. And for this reason, when we are trying to comprehend the physical side of pederasty, our imagination draws the abused child, but this was not the case because boys, usually pederasty, it implies that it was a long, lifelong, lifelong friendship with a pederastic lover, and this doesn't fit in this picture with abused child. Yeah. So it was lifelong friendship. You don't do it with someone who abuses you. So the younger male was regarded with respect. Basically, it was not someone who satisfied the needs of the older male. He was regarded with respect. He was not as a kind of object of sexual gratification, and was, for example, portrayed with respect in art. And also, this word "pais" can also be understood as it was perceived as a tender way of calling a child, the one that the parent might call the child. And of course, rape, physical contact that we define as rape, was not aligned to. It happened in ancient Greeks with, same like in our society, with children, with slaves, women, and men, and all of them were possible victims of rape. But pederasty was different phenomena from rape, and even they had in regulation of sexual behavior, Athenian laws didn't recognize the age as a factor, but they considered some other factors like consent. So pederasty was fundamentally different from the abuse, and to comprehend it in this way, just it's hard for us because this is how we're not predisposed to think it in this way. But if we try to do it, just to see the caring relationship within this phenomena, that mean that will shift the perspective might shift the perspective of contemporary understanding of love. Although our conceptualistic thinking is unable to see the difference between pederastic relationship and the rape of a child, to develop this ability and to recognize this and to learn to see it as an exercise, it would mean to deconstruct today's understanding conceptualistic intuition and to consider human being from this updated point of view, not as a one that's sublimating the terrible sexual and selfish nature, overcoming it, but as essentially woven, the one who's essentially woven in the relationship of care and the taken care, this part of reproductive complex as the one that defines the whole humanity. So as a central to in comprehending of our intimacy. So this is the hard task to accomplish, but if we do that, if we see the difference, that implies that we shifted this perspective. So that's it for today. We can discuss if you have any questions or ideas. And next time we'll discuss Freud's idea, how he came up with this centrality of sexual instinct in his theory of psychoanalysis. And we'll try to see how to overcome Freud using his own ideas and their own ideas are that sexual instinct is not central, but it's added in, mm, is added to the initial uh, urge to attach to a caregiver. So, do you have any question? You can unmute yourself, I think, if you want to ask something. Or you can write a question in chat on the right. Yes, so would we say that in Plato, love is more closely linked to a more primal instinct of survival? Yeah, it's a good idea, but still, with our understanding of survival, it's that it's something egoistic presupposes, because it's still Freudian. Survival is Freudian, but something that our egoistic nature wants us to. But it can be, we can rethink the very instinct of survival, yeah, in a different way, because it also might imply that for human babies, for humans themselves, it is really, taking care is really important. If you don't take care of the babies, if you don't have this ability and take care of each other, we would not survive. So this is not less important feature of our nature than sexual longing. And if we see this as a central, not egoistic need for protection from others, as something aggressive, we usually see it, but on the contrary, something tender and something caring. If we see this as a survival skill, then yes. So everything that has to do with biology, basically Freud thought actually that what he does is science, and he demystifies this sphere of love. But what he did, and the research of his time, the neurobiology and biology of evolutionary biology of his time, was not developed that well at his time. And what we know now, it implies that, it shows us that it's not that much sexual instinct what leads us, but well, something else. At least the whole reproductive complex and the whole spectrum of abilities and tendencies that we have, including and taken care of. And yeah, some other urges to attach to others without sublimating any sexual desire. Just the self-sufficient desire to attach to other and to participate, we can claim, in caring behavior. This is what we have. If we consider this as an instinct of survival, then yes, somehow. And it has to do with surviving. So, do you have any other questions or ideas? Yeah. Why did it take 2,000 years between Plato and Freud? Freud being seen as an overcoming of Plato's theory of love that dominates for all this time. Yeah, yeah, it was. It's true. But at the same time, Plato was perceived within two perspectives. Either it's the post-Freudian perspective that saw a source of Freudian biological thinking, that sexuality, that love is something based on biology, and biology implied for him sexual desire, or either it was seen as this spiritual kind of love that is something opposite to the animalistic desire of the body. So yeah, we can claim that Freud overcame Plato, but still those two perspectives, they survived. Either you can see it as love as a spiritual and has nothing to do with something real, what we call real, and has nothing to do with biology, or as rooted in this biological, which we reduce to sexual instinct. And what I wanted to show is that it is possible within the very biological scientific perception of human to derive the other perspective. It's what we call spiritual law, but it's not that spiritual, it's just same biological, just with other central aspect. The next question is, would trauma bonding of Stockholm Syndrome type feelings of affection be a post-Freudian explanation of a similar phenomenon to Greek pederasty, or is it an unreachable strait? This is a great with Stockholm Syndrome. My idea here is basically all love can be interpreted as a result of this syndrome, to more or less the same extent, because it's we tend to think that relationships are not traumatic, that it's possible to have a relationship that are this ideal of relationship where people don't traumatize each other. I mean, psychologically and the level of psyche. But if it's really, I don't think it's really possible, because even if in case of parents and children, it's the most obvious, like the basic kind of attachment that we just later in romantic relationship we repeat this type of attachment, and clearly we can see that in this type of relationship it's this perfect idea of non-traumatizing relationship is impossible. We can't reach it, because child's supposed to be children grow up, and we need to teach them some basic skills, and so there is no perfect model that it's possible to implement, a perfect model that would be untraumatizing. So considering that all the relationships are traumatizing, and this idea of domination, of tyranny and submission, and it's switchable. Basically, we don't know who tyranny comes from in case of parent-child relationship. Either it's a child who is a tyrant and dominates parents, or either it's because we need to satisfy children's needs and we sacrifice ourselves, or either it comes from the tyranny comes from a parent, because parents have to teach children and explain them the rules, and they have to do it otherwise child wouldn't survive. So this tyranny and traumatization, it's necessary, is present in all kind of human attachment. We don't even feel, if it's not traumatizing, we don't even feel it as a love, as attachment. Even the traumatizing event can be not just the fact of like psychological traumatization, but the fact that the one who we are in love with, we want them to be constantly present, like a small child wants his or her mother to be constantly present. And if mother leaves him or her, this is traumatizing already, because what child needs is its mother present there all the time, but it's impossible. So even the fact that the one who we are attached to are not there, this is traumatizing. Even if they do something, it is traumatizing. In case they don't do anything, just not present, it is traumatizing. So all the relationship, the principles of attachment of a parent and child and the romantic attachment, it presupposes even we can claim based on traumatization, because we can't feel it as attachment if there is no traumatization. And this means that all attachment is Stockholm syndrome, because we're basically attached to someone who hurts us. So, and despite this fact, and we miss the one who we in love with and who at the same time hurts us. So to some degree, not to the degree that the way we usually define the Stockholm syndrome, but at some level it is true to when you talk about every kind of relationship. Yeah, including we can claim that Greek pederasty. I think it wasn't considering that this was an extension of parental complex. It was the Stockholm syndrome, of course. Yeah, pederasty was pedantic in form. Yeah, like romantic relationship today. But we don't really know, I think. Can you develop it more about pederasty being pedantic? Yeah, that was substantial. Yeah, some researchers claim that they didn't presuppose physical contact, but I think they found out that at least it was um, some kind of, maybe without penetration, but physical contact. And it's not about that kind of elements, but it's about whether it's this attachment is a deviation of heterosexual relationship, because heterosexual relationships sometimes don't presuppose sexual relationship, or either it's an extended version of parenthood. And why I wanted to show that it's extended version of parenthood, because in case of parenthood, it's more easily for us to see a caring element as a central one, and we don't tend to see it as a sublimation. But Freud did. Freud saw parental caring as an attachment, even attachment of child to parents, as a sublimation of sexual instinct. But still, in everyday life, it's easier for us to see the caring of a child and child's attachment to a parent as self-sufficient phenomena, not as deviated type of deviated sexuality, sexual instinct. And we can try to accomplish same with, and it's biological phenomena. It's not something spiritual or cultural. It is biological. Animals take care of mammals. Some of them, well, all of them, but to a different degree, take care uh, of their offspring, and it's something that comes biologically, and they have instinct for this. So it's not less biological, not more cultural than sexual desire. And if we learn to see this at the basis of heterosexual relationship, and we have some scientific evidence that it's not transformed sexual desire, but that there is no such thing as substantial sexual desire that drives human beings. Rather, what drives us to attach to others is this need and instinct for participation in caring behavior. To attach to others, self-sufficient and not less biological than um, sexual instinct, and more substantial, and so define our nature in in a way that it suits us, that it fits our nature more to be defined with. Do you have any other questions? Okay, and then see you next week, and we will discuss Freud and see how to correct Freud's mistake, uh, relying on his own theory. And then see you next week. Bye.